Okay. So share a screen. All right. Herb, would you read our first text, please?
Our parent, our sovereign, favor us and answer us, for we have no accomplishments. Deal with us charitably and kindly and deliver us.
Okay, and I'll read that in Hebrew, and then you can go on to the other part. Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu va'anenu, ki ein banu ma'asim, aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed v'hoshienu. Go on, please, Herb.
Avinu Malkeinu was sung on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, as well as other fast days. The first two words talk about the two ways we relate to God, a parent close and a sovereign. These are similar to the two aspects of God we focus on during the holidays: God's justice and God's mercy, God's male and female side, respectively. The female side of God is sometimes called the Shekhinah, a divine presence. Does this way of thinking about God work for you?
Great, thank you.
I've always wondered why justice and male were synonymous and female and mercy were synonymous. But I think I've known some females who would morph it with justice and some males who would morph it with mercy, but beside the point, I guess.
Well, Herb, could you imagine a female God doing some of the things that we attribute to God in the Old Testament?
But yes,
You know, the smoting and the, just seem like, much more being willing to take to I don't know what the right word is, but
wreak havoc.
Wreak havoc or worse, willing to kill people or to have people killed. It just seemed like a much more brutal God. And that just doesn't kind of fit with, I think, what we typically think of as what a female would do.
But since God is mysterious and is a mystery anyway,
no, that's true.
We know.
We don't know. You're right.
We have female leaders of countries where there's brutality going on, and they have to deal with it or order it. We don't know what that person is bringing to the leadership role, which would be godlike in some sense. I mean, certainly mortal, but somebody that we can see and follow. But women can be tough like that, I suppose. And maybe they would be also more wanting more accountability, a more disciplinarian type. So I think there could be that attribute.
I guess when I pray to God, I'm not thinking about whether it's a male or female type person or entity, I should say, that I'm praying to.
So
I never consider it one way or the other, but
so the question here is that Avinu Malkeinu and Adonam, for that matter, posit a close side of God and a distant side of God. Does that resonate for you? Does it work for you?
When I think of the way Stewart sings Avinu Malkeinu, there's something very like heart-wrenching about it. It
Mhm.
doesn't, it's not like a happy sound. It's beautiful, but it's like really pulls at my heartstrings anyway.
I think the
Maybe-
way we think, I think that the way we think about God, mental position, when we come to God, sometimes we're in dire circumstances and we need guidance. And then we think of him as a parent or as an advisor, a parent for being close or whatever. But sometimes we come to God in happy and gayest occasions and just want to give thanks and gratitude. And I think we feel differently. I don't think we always feel that God is the same. Just like our parents, sometimes we can't predict what mood they're in.
I think that's important. I think in continuation also of last week's conversation, it's sort of the complexity and fullness of God. He's not, or she's not, or it's not one thing. It's a complex, too complex to fully grasp in one concept. And this is a description of some of the dual nature. It's probably far more than dual in the nature of what God is conceptually, but at least this makes it more than a one-dimensional construct for God. So it works very much for me that there's differing aspects. I think there are more than two, but
Right.
multitude of aspects.
But I think it's each person's understanding of what God means to them also.
The interface, I agree.
And the
Going,
emotional state that you're
going back to the days of our kids in the preschool, Norma may remember this story, and I don't know, maybe maybe Alan even. Our executive time, Harvey Gross, may rest in peace, was a rotund guy with a big beard. This is the image that the little ones were given about what God looked like, because he went into the preschool one day and one little preschooler looked up and said, God. So there's an image already frozen into the mind of a
Right.
child.
A large presence, right?
Large presence with a beard, and so we carry that through our lives.
Carol?
Yes.
Yeah, my own personal experience about what I thought God looked like when I was very young.
Uh-huh.
Don't ask me how I envisioned this. I was going to see my grandparents. I'm walking up the stairs to their apartment, looking through the skylight, and then someone like the Jolly Green Giant came about and spoke gently. And I told my mom, I saw God. And she says, well, Jim, that's very nice.
Mhm.
Good for you, huh? Well. I'm wondering if our vision of God has anything to do with if we are believers in our relationship with our own parents, whether one parent or another was stronger in support of us, or
for sure.
or whether neither parent was supportive and we looked.
Mm.
I just wonder if that carries through in our lives too, as to what we do to fill whatever gap we might have had from a lack of parenting, or from a comfort level that we received from parenting to influence us in that respect.
So are you saying the lack of parenting is what we put on to God when we want to confront God?
Perhaps, a way of reaching for some support, that security or the.
But then I think those parents did a great thing for their child, at least to have someone to go to feel confident in
Mhm.
inner strength.
All right, let's move on from Rosh Hashanah. I'll be back in a few weeks before we know it anyway.
That's right.
So we're now moving into a section of how much does God do and how much do we do? So, Phil, would you read our next text, please?
Yes, sure. You want me to read the English? Praised are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with the Lord's commandments and commanded us to light the Shabbat candle.
Good. I will read the Hebrew, not because I doubt any given person's ability to read Hebrew, but I do not want to embarrass anybody in general. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitchem b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Amen.
Amen.
With that, Phil, would you continue with our discussion?
Okay. This is the blessing we say for lighting Shabbat candles. It has the phrase Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, who has sanctified us with the Lord's commandments and commanded us, which is added to all blessings over things we do. Some of these blessings are for things we are commanded to do in the Torah, like sitting in a sukkah. And some of them are for things which came after the Torah, like lighting Hanukkah candles. Couldn't you also say Shabbat candles? We still say that we are commanded to do these things because of Deuteronomy 17:11, which the rabbis interpreted as meaning we should do what they say, and it will be like God told us to do those things. A point about God being made in this blessing is that God gives us ways of living a better life. Note that while the first word of the blessing has the root bet resh, chav, meaning bless, some people translate it in this situation as praised on grounds that God has everything and can't be blessed. Does this way of thinking about God work for you?
It's interesting with that particular prayer, David, because it's so common, like you said, everybody knows it. I always think of it in the Hebrew and never really pay that much attention to the English anymore.
Hmm.
And the English
Yes.
is really nice.
Yeah. So the theological statement being made here with this blessing over lighting the candles is that God has given us rules or guidelines or suggestions or however you think about them, but given us things to do that are supposed to make our life better.
Oh, does it work for me in my view of a non-anthropomorphized God, or the belief that I've been commanded by something greater to do something, not exactly in a literal sense, but yes, in the sense that you just mentioned, David, in the sense that it makes me think about what are positive things to do and why would doing these things be positive in a general sense.
Hmm.
So that's how it works for me, but not in the literal constructs, because everyone knows I don't believe in a literal God up there telling me what to do or giving me the 10 Commandments.
There are commandments, if you will want to call them, which tell us to do something and we understand what they're for. There are other commandments, like the red heifer, if you will, that we don't understand at all. And the question is, what is the purpose of lighting the Shabbat candles? They don't do anything for us once we light them, really. And the only thing I can think of is that if we light them, so of remembrance that it is Shabbat for the next 25 hours. Whereas if we didn't light them, maybe we wouldn't remember it. Is there any other purpose to lighting them?
Well, at least once a week, if we do light them, it brings the presence into the area in which you are lighting them and making us mindful that there is a higher power and what we have around us. And we can be grateful for, and just to be grateful for our health that we're here.
I mean, to
But
quote,
lighting the candles for me to me, I consider, why do we do this? It's just a direction or an advice to do something to lead a fuller life. And what has to do with Shabbat is that well, when did we start doing this? We started doing this after we were freed from being slaves in Egypt. So to me, it's symbolic of that rest and to reflect. And does it say in the Torah we have to light candles? Is instruction, or is that something that was developed through the rabbis who is mentioned here that said it? If the rabbis tell you here, that then it's as if it were in coming a commandment that was written.
for me, it's like to quote the Passover Haggadah, why is this night different than all other nights? So, I mean, it's just a way to make Saturday, to make Shabbat different than all other nights. It's something to remind you. And then if you're thinking about why it's different, then you're thinking about God. And then, so, I mean, for me, that's what that does.
Well, I also think the light, just the word light, is very important in all of Judaism. When we see the light, it's not only is it beautiful, but it makes us think and it lights our way.
Very nice.
Interesting.
I think of it as these commandments and ways of leading a better life help us to maintain sacred space and holy time in our homes or in our lives. And I got that concept from a book I read. But basically, our home is not just a regular home, it's a place dedicated to God. And so we do it by following the commandments. Things like kashrut, which have not been discussed here, also help us to remember that we are Jewish 3 times a day, and that we think about compassion. So they have other meanings beyond what necessarily was stated in there.
And also the candle holders have something, like I use my grandmother's candle holders. I mean, they are extremely old. And every Shabbat, I think about that and about family. So there's a lot of different significance.
That brings family together. That's one thing that helped keep our family together during the lockdown, because we instituted a weekly Zoom to light the candles together.
That's nice, Charles. Yes.
Very nice.
So, and we hadn't done that before, so we had more opportunities to share with each other as a group rather than shall I say, occasional telephone calls, isolated phone calls. And so that's something even when we were growing, my wife did this every week when the children were young, and kept it up. And the eldest daughter would come back, even though she was at Northwestern, every Friday. You're home, for Shabbat, she insisted. So,
Yeah, I think the pandemic has brought a lot of people back to lighting candles and making Kiddush and having more to do with Shabbat than before.
mhm.
David, I think it was Herb that asked the question whether this was an innovation of the rabbis, if I understood the question. And I wondered if you might address that, because my impression, could be totally wrong, was that it was rabbinical to light Shabbos candles, and maybe a kind of a statement against people who rejected the, or in part at least, maybe the oral law, although I may be mixing the historical periods here. In other words, some people like the Karaites didn't light candles. They thought it was a desecration because it would be having light on the Sabbath day. And so it was a statement of that kind. But I don't know what the history is, if you can give any light on that.
Yeah, I can, as to use your pun, give light on that question. So it is a rabbinic innovation. The reason for this is because Shabbat comes after dark, after sunset. And so if you're having your Shabbat dinner, you're having it after sunset. In the pre-electricity era, if you are eating dinner in the dark, then you are more likely to do things like spill soup on someone else, and then you ruin the Shabbos atmosphere. So the original reason for lighting candles is very practical. That doesn't mean that other reasons why we do it and other layers of meaning haven't been added on since then. So like all the different things that you guys were talking about are definitely part of the benefits and the layers of meaning that we get from lighting Shabbos candles today. They're just not the original reason why it was instituted. In the Mishnah, in Masechet Shabbat, there's a whole discussion about with what do we like, what sorts of things are appropriate to light candles on Shabbat and what are not. So we know that by the year 200 CE, this was a well-instituted practice. The Karaites were Jews from the 900s-ish, I believe, give or take a century or so. And there's still some today who only went by rabbinic law, but not, only went by biblical law, but not rabbinic law. And so since in the Torah, it says not to kindle a spark on Shabbat, they interpreted that to mean that you don't have any fire on Shabbat. Whereas the rabbis looked at that same rule and said, okay, fine, you don't kindle a spark on Shabbat. We'll kindle the spark before Shabbat and then it can burn. And so some people, take this further and do things like TVs and timers, which are within the letter of the law of Shabbat, but some would argue not within the spirit of the law on Shabbat. But nonetheless, this idea of can you have fire on Shabbat has been a very heated argument, and is something that continues to be meaningful to Jews today, even when we've gotten beyond the era of no electricity, or of no, even when we have other ways of shedding light on our Shabbos dinners.
So David, the candles we light today generally last about 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Is there any rule why we can't light a larger candle that lasts throughout the night? Or would that be against the spirit of Shabbat?
You probably could. I would argue that falls under Baal Tashchit, not wasting, which is a Jewish value, also anchored in the Torah, although around trees and not candles. And so the idea being that 3 hours after dark, certainly in the summer, you're probably going to bed and you don't need candles to see. And by the next morning, if you're thinking of, why not just get a whole 24-hour candle? By the next morning, presumably you have daylights to help you see in your house. So from the Shabbat angle, you probably could, but there are other Jewish reasons why you might not want to go beyond a 3-hour candle or other such Shabbos candles.
Just for fire, I mean, worrying about if it tips over, especially if it's a large candle, so.
Right.
Well, I have Yisker yard side candles.
Yeah, but those are like in a glass usually, Diane, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
David, does the prayer actually say, we keep talking about candle. Does it actually say candle, or does it say a light of some kind? Because I would think when the prayers were developed, they were using oil and a wick, not a candle. Candles didn't come until, I'm guessing, much, much later.
Yeah. It says ner, which is the modern Hebrew word for candle. That being said, originally at the time of when the blessing was developed and when the tradition of lighting Shabbos lights were developed, they were like the list of things in the Mishnah talks about all sorts of things.
I'll be right back.
Okay, and wax may or may not be amongst them. It's been a little bit of time since I studied that list.
But I know in the 16, 17, and 1800s, they had special Sabbath lamps that were not a lamp that stands on a table, but a lamp that is suspended from the ceiling, and it would have a vial of oil that I don't know how it lasted during the night, but I know that there was such a thing as Sabbath lamps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to just say something that hasn't got to do with candles, but in the reading that that was done, they showed the the blessing, the root word of resh kaf, meaning bless, and some people translate it in the situation as praise on grounds that God has everything and cannot be blessed. That doesn't make any sense to me, because I mean, we end up blessing God every morning when we pray. So where do they get that from?
So when you say that we bless God every morning when we pray, can you give examples?
Yeah. I think here, let me just go through the morning. Well, in the Shemon Esrei, you're basically saying, praise be, well, here, in Pazuka de Simri, you say, you shall ever be praised in heaven and on earth, our sovereign, the great and holy God. Songs of praise and psalms of adoration become you, Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors. Praises that acknowledge your grandeur, your glory, your might, your magnificence, your strength, your sanctity, and your sovereignty. Now and forever, acclaim and honor are yours. Praised are you, Adonai, sovereign of wonders, crowned with adoration, delighting in our songs and psalms, exalted ruler, eternal life of the universe.
So Morris, what you just read, to me at least, sounds like a lot of praise of God, thus reinforcing what was in the text, as opposed to a blessing to God. Like, I bless you with, may you be blessed with good health, may you be blessed with strong
Well,
finances.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I guess I misunderstood this, so.
I'm glad that you
God
asked.
has everything. Is that what it says, that God has everything?
Right. Let's go on.
David, just
No.
before we go on, Deuteronomy 17:11.
Yeah.
I'm not asking that we discuss that now, but that sounds like a really what I haven't looked it up, but it sounds like that could be a very interesting concept, because it's kind of saying, the rabbis figured out something in the Torah which could be interpreted as, you're going to have to take our word as the word of God, and that's pretty. I'm not going to say presumptuous, but it's pretty daring.
It's kind of core between some of the differences between Orthodox and more Orthodox conservative Judaism and Reform Judaism and some parts of Reconstructionists, etc., that don't believe that the Mishnah is an edict of God, but is, wise teachings of our ancestors. And this is where it seems part of that dichotomy occurs between his Mishnah, a continuation in some ways of the Torah and Haftarah, or is it, or are these books really God's messages through the rabbis? Or is it just, wise teachings of our ancestors? I mean, David, did I understand our discussions about the different branches of Judaism correctly when we were there?
Yes, that would be one of the differences.
I understand it's not the only one. But
yes, no, you.
But it's the core. It's a core one. It's one of the main.
17:11 is a rather brief one, and it's rather interesting in some respects. It says, "You shall act in accordance with the instructions given you and the ruling handed down to you. You must not deviate from the verdict that they announce to you, either to the right or to the left." So this is either a blanket statement that you can dictate whatever you want the people to do, or it can mean that if it's not written down, you don't do it at all, because that means you're going to the right or to the left. You're either adding or subtracting, which you're not supposed to do, supposedly. So it doesn't really tell you light Shabbos candles. It tells you, well, if you think you want to do it, go ahead and tell the people to do it.
But who was they? Who are they?
Presumably the sages are the ones who have the say.
Well, that would be an argument for somebody who said it was all this was all a fabrication, so people could impose their will, as you say, where they thought it was right. Now, depending on your particular viewpoint of who, the origins of the scriptures.
True, but apparently the peasants couldn't tell the elite what to do. It's only the other way around.
Exactly.
The sages were the ones who could give the rules.
Well, precisely, yeah.
I mean, who makes the laws in this country? It's the people in the Senate and the House.
If the rabbis are making the rules, why do we need God? If man,
that's a good question.
If man is making up all the rules and the shoulds and the ritual, why do we even have to go higher? What's this all about anyway? I'm stuck with that.
Well, God enlightens them on what to do.
Okay.
I mean, that,
Well, the 10 Commandments and Moses, if you know, if God supposedly spoke to Moses, but then it all drifts down from that. But
Carol, we only have Moses's word for it that God
that's
spoke to him.
right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
well, supposedly had all these wonders and miracles
Yeah,
as a demonstration.
and we still have
And you,
a new baby born. You know, I mean, that's still a miracle to me to see life come up like that. But okay, I'll stop.
then we can start really another deep vein of conversation about the origins of life and how that, well, it's God, or is it not?
Yeah, who gives
The
us?
origins of the universe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty complicated.
Just look up if you're someplace there aren't too many lights, or look at the photographs that we're getting back, the images we're getting back from some of these satellites that are going out into deep space, and talk about awe-inspiring. To me, it is.
It absolutely is. But it doesn't answer questions.
No.
It creates many more. So,
Carol, what else would we have to talk about if we have all the answers?
well, I didn't mean to
No, but I
throw a
mean, if
wrench
we're
into
talking about
this.
how we envision God and what our concept, what is his meaning, I mean, that leads us to, well,
I've had talks with Herb. I mean, Herb studies a lot, and I find myself thrown all the time by the fact that, you know, this one said this and this one said this, and people, the Orthodox men sit all day and study, and I figured no one ever really finds out anything. You know, we can only speculate. That's all we can do. So if that gives comfort to us and provides structure, because somebody did say we need to do these rituals. We have holidays every year. We fast on certain days. We light candles. You know, we have a lot of ritual that make us feel connected and comfortable in many ways, but it doesn't really, I mean, we can pray, and I do, but if I start to question why, then it upsets me, so I just do it. There's a very good film called, and it was a book called This Is Where I Leave You. It's somewhat comedic, but maybe some of you know of it, but it's about a family with a non-Jewish mother, a Jewish father, and he passes away. And it takes place at the Shiva, or the planning of it, that his 3 kids are doing, and they hadn't been together, and they all came together. And they started reminiscing about their dad and how every once in a while he would wake them up on a Shabbos, and he'd make them get dressed up, and he'd schlep them to shul, and they'd have to sit there. And one of the boys leaned over to his dad one day, and he said, in shul, and he said, "Do you really believe in God?" And the father said, "No." And he said, "Well, why are we here then?" He said, "Because I've been wrong from time to time." I've been known to be wrong.
That was good.
So that's always, that line really struck me.
Yes.
It's, I mean, that's where we are, I think. You know, who are we to dispute? But on the other hand, it'd be nice to have, for me, comforting to have something a little more concrete. So.
I always remember when we were starting our congregation in Costa Rica, and there was a rabbi visiting from Nashville, and I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but I do remember his answer. They're talking, it has something to relate with what we're doing. And he said, "Well, you know, I have faith. You have to, the answer is faith. You have faith in any of this, that it's, there's some substance to this. Does it make any sense?"
The question I would ask is, are you more comfortable knowing there's a possibility of God existing somewhere out there, even though we don't know much about God? Or would you be more comfortable absolutely knowing there is nothing out there?
No, I think that's why we have this concept in the first place, is that the early humans they had the same questions we have. They don't know why they were there and who did the trees and, you know, the animals. And so they started creating answers among themselves for attributing it to something. And I think that's where this all came from. There's just something that has to have put all this together. It's incredible when you look at it. So I think man created it. And then in my feeling too, is that I feel like God is really our community, our human community in the large scale of the world. Sometimes we pray for something, but it's a friend who actually comes forth and helps answer the prayer. So I don't know, you know, I could be here all night and all week talking about this.
So what do you see in the natural world that you are awestruck by, that makes you think that there must be a God because man alone could not have done such a thing? Besides the birth of a baby.
Albert Einstein said, there has to be a God. When he looks at the stars and the moon, who else could have created?
There, right, yes.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I don't think you have to have a concept. I mean, a concrete idea, but isn't it comforting to have something greater than yourself? And it's really you, when you're praying, you work it out yourself.
Right.
But I think it's that concept of having something greater than yourself that keeps us focused. And actually, what is Judaism all about? It's about our central belief is one God, this concept that I speak about. But it's all the rich heritage we have, the writings that have come down to us, and the reasonings that all these rabbunim put together. Some we may not agree with, but they fit for the time. That's what I think about when I think about Judaism and God, and what difference does it mean if it's praised or blessed?
Right.
So on that excellent note, I'm going to stop the share.